Hey everyone, it's your friend Dan, and you're watching 613 Creatives. Thanks for joining us today. If you are an actor or a filmmaker in Eastern Ontario, you will definitely want to subscribe and share this podcast with your fellow filmmakers. We're getting to know and connecting the movie-making talent of the region. Please check out our other episodes. Let me know what kind of stories you'd like to hear and which ones you have to tell. Now, my guest today has an extensive background in classical music. His work has been showcased on national radio, the CBC, and he has prepared choirs for several international conductors at the NAC. At a young age, he discovered his love for Super 8 film and eventually attended film studies at Carleton U. During the 1990s, his documentaries were highly praised and aired on networks such as TVO, Discovery Channel, and Women's Television Network, with one such project providing him the opportunity to work with Sir Richard Attenborough and Pierce Brosnan. In later years, he delved into the world of digital, where much of his work has harkened back to his life and love of music. His work has been screened at the Mayfair here in Ottawa and garnered accolades from festivals around the world. He's currently producing a holiday-themed family film entitled Charlie and the Flying Toboggan, where once again he'll be working his magic with green screen. Please welcome to the show, Kevin Reeves. Hi, Kevin. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Your background is impressive. I know we've, chatted here and there at Kino and, the after socials and things like that, but I had no idea that that you've had such a prolific background. Yeah, getting right into it. Obviously, you've garnered a lot of recognition from your films over the years. But how about we start at the beginning? Tell us about one of your earliest successes, the documentary "Let Me Call You Sweetheart," that you co-produced and directed in 1992 for the Canadian Museum of Nature. What was that about, and what sort of attention has it gotten?
Well, it's a bit of a story, but it was an important step, I guess, in my filmmaking life. Mm-hmm. I was living in Toronto at the time, but I came back to Ottawa and approached MTR Productions with the idea to make a documentary about Viola McMillan, who had become a multimillionaire due to several gold strikes from the 1930s up to the 1960s. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, it was a time when it was unimaginable for women to be in that field or frankly, many fields at the time. Especially mining, if you can imagine. Mm-hmm. But Viola became both a prospector and a mine developer, and eventually she became the president of the Prospectors and the president of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada from 42 to 64. And in 64, that's when she instigated the largest stock scandal in Canadian history.
Oh, really?
Wow. Yeah, so there's a bit of wrinkle there to the documentary. It was called the Windfall Scandal, and it was in the Globe and Mail for weeks in the headlines because it affected many, many, many people across Canada, whether they were rich or, middle class or whatever.
Right.
And incidentally, Viola happened to be my great aunt.
No way.
Yeah, which is why I thought this would be a really interesting subject to tackle. So the film moved forward because of the Museum of Nature. They gave a really hefty amount of money to MTR Productions because Viola had just donated a prestigious mineral collection worth close to $6 million to the Museum of Nature. So they thought to reciprocate, they would make this film about her.
Okay.
Wow. So as I said, I was living in Toronto at the time. It was an easy subway ride for me to go to Viola's apartment, which was Avenue in St. Clair. And so I walked in and said to the concierge I was visiting Viola McMillan, and he said, "Oh, I'll take the elevator to the 19th floor. She's expecting you." And I asked which room she was in, and he said, the 19th floor. Which was the penthouse. So she had the entire floor.
Oh, wow.
I'd only met her a few times in my life, even though I was related.
So MTR Productions was, did they find you? You found them? How
I,
did?
I well, I had pitched with MTR Productions. I pitched a family series to them, and I think they were interested and they were moving in on it. They were working on it, but then I think the Viola McMillan story was just so interesting to them, and of course they got a whack of cash from the museum that we just went ahead.
Right.
Um, and I started as the writer because I knew a lot about it, and ended up being director, and with my film partner being the editor as well, the co-editor. So while I was visiting Viola, she told me that she had films in her closet. So I, pulled them out. She's only 5 feet tall, so she couldn't reach them. So I pulled them all out and borrowed a 16 mil projector and projected on her closet door all these films. And I couldn't believe it because these were films that she had taken back in the 1930s, the early 30s.
Oh, wow.
Like at the same time King Kong was released, for Pete's sake. And it was, she knew she was going to be famous, so she decided to document her life with these films.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a treasure trove for me because I could use all this material in the documentary, and which nobody else had, and which she hadn't seen practically since it was shot. She had no way of seeing it. So I brought all these films back to Ottawa and put it together with my film partner, Pat Edwards, who was actually my mentor, who taught me quite a bit about editing. I think he was kind of a hidden jewel in Canada as a filmmaker. So eventually we shot in 6 cities, including Cobalt, Ontario, because that's where Viola had first discovered her love of mining, was, the silver, the massive amount of silver in cobalt.
Right.
So I went there with a cameraman and just loved shooting it. It's like another world, it's like the other side of the moon, practically.
Some say the same thing about Sudbury, or used to anyway.
Well, I remember Sudbury when it looked like, in fact, when the astronauts used to come up and train, and then they did all the growth and everything, and it looks way, way better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's true. This, you would be really interested in this documentary coming from a mining town, from a nickel.
Absolutely.
All I can say is that I'm glad I shot this film when I did, because practically every single person is now dead. Every person I interviewed, including my camera operator, who died of cancer in his 40s, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we managed to capture the end of an era in Canadian mining. And we had the premiere at the Museum of Nature, and it was packed, and Viola was there with Governor General Ray Natishan and his wife Gerda. That was her date.
Wow.
And then the Toronto premiere was at the Royal York Hotel during the Prospectors Association annual meeting. They met every year, hundreds of them. So all the mining magnates across Canada. And it was a big hit. I was quite proud of it. I mean, I worked a whole year on it in post-production alone. I took Christmas Day off, I remember.
That was the one day too. That was Christmas.
And I nearly had to go to the hospital out of sheer exhaustion.
Oh, wow.
During the making of it, yeah. Because I wanted to do a good job. It was my first big film.
Of course. Yeah.
So it won a lot of awards, and as you mentioned at the beginning, it played on various channels, CTV, TV Ontario, Discovery Channel, and the Women's Network.
Right.
So and now there's a book about Viola, a brand new one. There have been several, but there's a new one by Tim Faulkner, just came out last month, and I actually met with him 2 years ago at Deacon Brody's of all places, and and chatted with him about Viola and what she was like and so on. So I haven't got the book yet, but that would be interesting.
Yeah.
And then she was exonerated in later years by the government of Canada, and she got the Order of Canada on her 90th birthday.
Oh, wow.
So she was thrilled about that. She was quite embarrassed about the whole business of going to prison for 9 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And what did Viola think of the film?
Okay, what did Viola think of the film? Well, she called me while we were in post-production,
Okay.
And she said, Kevin, you're not going to put anything about Windfall in that movie. And I said, but Viola, this is like a huge and a well-known chapter in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And when she saw how, I think, even-handed it was, then she let it go,
Mm-hmm.
and people actually really I think she really enjoyed it secretly, that
Yeah.
whole aspect of her life.
Okay. She never gave you feedback after the premiere.
No, I think
No.
she did. She said, "Why is everybody crying?" And it's because because there's a very sad part in the movement in the movie where George, her husband, dies. Like 1977, he died,
Well,
and I think it was quite a sentimental. We handled it in a kind of nostalgic, sentimental way, and with
mm-hmm.
beautiful shots of her farm and her standing alone by a tree with these long shadows, and that got people, and it got them emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she knew the answer to her question, but she just didn't want to. She was tough and feisty,
Yeah.
and men were scared of her. Politicians in Ottawa were scared of her. So, like, she changed laws, and
Mm-hmm.
she galvanized that whole industry. It's quite
Yeah.
interesting.
That's amazing. Definitely someone that you want to make a film about.
Yeah.
No doubt. That must be like that's quite the feather in your cap, like I mean you were pretty much straight out of university, right? And then here you come upon this project, this opportunity, and I mean it's seen by all these important people and wins all these awards and gets on TV. I mean that must have been how would that feel like?
Well, I wasn't right out of university. I was actually about 30, 31.
Okay.
Um, yeah. Uh,
Was your first big project?
it was my first big project. It was a lot of money to the producers. And there were three producers, and I think they did a really good job coordinating it, because I think it was their first really big documentary, as it was mine. Um, and as I say, we shot in 6 cities, and we were shooting in film. So, as you know, that's expensive
Mm-hmm.
prospect right there. I mean, I also had I brought a crane in from Montreal to Toronto,
Oh
and
wow.
just for like 3 shots. And the producers were questioning me, well, why do you need a crane? That's expensive. And I said, yeah, but I've got this, these shots that I would really want to do. So
Mm-hmm.
they were good. They brought this crane in, and all the Toronto cranes were booked, so that it had to come from Montreal. That they really, I think those shots really paid for themselves. I think they really worked well in telling the story. And we had a panther dolly which we had to take apart at the base of her apartment and take it up in the elevator in pieces and put it back together on the 19th floor and do dolly shots. So, panther dollies, they're not these little rails that we have for video cameras now. These had to hold big 16 mil cameras. And so the equipment was hefty and it was expensive. And of
Yeah.
course, you had to color time. It was called. It wasn't called grading. It was color timing in the labs. Yeah, the interesting thing about post-production for this film, CGOH in Ottawa, when it was not burned to the ground, previous to the fire, obviously,
Hmm.
they had just bought $1 million edit suite. $1 million. And this
Wow.
is when they were using Betacam SP. That was the broadcast standard of the time.
Right.
Um, so I was editing from 16 mil to Betacam and then to Betacam. So we're already a couple of generations away. But
Ah.
imagine nowadays, it wouldn't be $1 million. It'd be, $600 for a program on your computer. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's how much it's changed.
Yeah.
And that's why, filmmaking back then was so incredibly expensive, because every single step was a huge cost.
Mm-hmm.
So the budget was $250,000 back in the early 90s.
Yeah. And that was
Yeah.
quite a bit of money in in the 90s.
Yeah. 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 I
Mm-hmm.
saw I didn't see much of that. But anyway,
Oh.
I mean, film anyway.
Oh, jeez. That's too bad. Another rather impressive story you have is working on the 1999 documentary, The Spirit of Grey Owl, where you got to work and chum around with the likes of Sir Richard Attenborough and Pierce Brosnan. You got to tell us more about this documentary. How did you get involved in it, and what was the experience like?
Well, how I got involved with it was my idea. I wanted to actually do the feature film, not the documentary. For those who aren't familiar with the story of Grail, his real name is Archie Bellany, and he was an odd little English boy who wanted nothing more than to become a native Canadian, and which is what he did. He came over here, went to Bear Island in Temagami, and married a native woman called Angel Eguina. She could barely speak English, and he couldn't speak her language. And she was the first of four wives, and he was married to three of them at the same time.
Oh my goodness!
And I became friends with their daughter and her son. I was really good friends with Grail's grandson. But his third wife, who really changed him for the better, because he was trapping all that time, and she was against trapping. She was a Mohawk girl from Mattawa named Anna Herrio. And she's, I think what led me to this whole story was, in fact, her book called Devil in Deerskins. Since I read that book, I befriended Anna Herrio's daughter and some of her nieces from Mattawa. And, but she didn't know that he was English until the day after he died. And the North Bay Nugget, the local paper, had disclosed the entire story. They had sat on this story because he was so famous back then because of his books and his articles about conservation, that the editor of the North Bay Nugget didn't want to unveil him, unmask him.
Oh, okay.
And I even, for the movie, I even interviewed the young cub reporter, he was 18 at the time, who actually uncovered that whole story. I interviewed him in, I think, 1993, so just over 30 years ago. He's since long died, as, again, most people in this documentary.
Oh my God.
But I just became completely obsessed with the story to the point where I actually wrote an opera about it. I got the rights to Devil in Deerskins and wrote the opera through Anna Herrio's eyes. So he was really the first celebrity conservationist in Canada, which really drives the story. And he was invited to speak at Buckingham Palace in 1937 when Elizabeth was a 10-year-old princess. And I actually wrote to Buckingham Palace to see if I could interview the Queen, because to see if she actually remembered meeting him in the throne room when she was 10.
Oh, wow.
And I got a very nice letter from her press secretary saying, well, she doesn't give interviews, but he went on to ask more about the production because he was very, very curious about it. So we actually exchanged more letters, and I framed the first one.
Wow.
So that was neat. But anyway, getting to how I actually made it to talk with Richard Attenborough and so on, I'd known through musical connections the British High Commissioner at the time, and he gave me Attenborough's fax number to his production company. And so I wrote him and said, I'd like to do the documentary and interview you and Brosnan, who had just played his first Bond at the time. So he's in between Bond pictures.
Right. And Richard Attenborough, he was directing the film, and Pierce Brosnan was playing the lead. That's
right, yes. Right. And in fact, it was a Canadian producer, now that I think of it, who financed it. It was the same fellow who financed his Gandhi, the one about 8 Oscars back in the early 80s. Jake Eberts is his name, a prolific Canadian producer.
Oh, wow.
And he raised $40 million for their version of Grail. I approached the History Channel to get money for this documentary, and the head of the channel at the time said, "Oh, Kevin, we just gave $100,000 to Bob Duncan out in Vancouver to do the same subject, Grail." I said, "Damn it,
what?
I'm home like a month too late, Yeah. So I went back to Pat Edwards and he said, we'll just do our own. We'll just finance it ourselves. So that's what we did. And we made it onto TV Ontario. And, well, he made it, of course, the History Channel. We made it to TV Ontario. And I compared them, and I have to say, in all honesty, that ours was better
Of course it
Maybe not
was.
so much, maybe not the cinematography, but I think our story was just more cohesive. He was
Mm.
also working on Sean McRae at the time. Anyway, that's another story.
I watched
Yeah,
bits and
so
pieces of the documentary on Tubi. Must be a good feeling, a documentary you did is on a international streaming service.
is it on Tubi?
Yeah, I found it on Tubi.
Oh, you're gonna have to send me the link
I'm
because
sure. Yeah, you,
I didn't
you
know
didn't
it was on,
know.
I didn't
Well,
know it was on Tubi.
congrats. Yeah. Well, there you go. Congrats. Yeah, it's on Tubi.
Are you sure it's the one that I made, or is it one of the? There are
Yeah.
three other documentaries I made.
I
Okay.
zipped down. I zipped to the end, and it has your name in the credits.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, it's also on Just Watch Me, which is a local streaming platform. It's
Okay.
for everything. It's like a little Netflix. Yeah, while I was on the set of Admiral's Grey Owl, it was great fun because Brosnan, super nice guy, very unassuming.
Yes.
Um, even though he had just played Bond,
Hmm.
he, I think he was fascinated with what I brought to the table because my connection to the descendants of both Grail and Anna Herrio. I had kind of the real story rather than just a kind of rose-colored glasses script by an Englishman. Um,
Right.
you know, their movie was very beautiful to look at and polished and so on, but it didn't tell the real story, I think.
Hmm.
And it, tell you the truth, it was like one of the biggest independent bombs in film history because it
Really?
lost. Attenborough never got a distributor in the States,
Oh.
and so it made something like $500,000 in the theater against $40 million budget.
Oh. Jeez. That's too bad.
So there's something to do, there's something to low budget production because if you just make your money back, you're laughing, you're doing well.
Yeah. Absolutely. A
Yeah,
lot less risk. What was Richard Attenborough like? Did you chum around with him a little bit?
yeah. Well, he was busy, so
Yeah, of course. He's directing the movie.
we had to wait some hours before there was a lull in the production.
Hmm.
And then he was extremely gracious, really, really a very erudite fellow. And of course, he is connected to everybody in British cinema history,
Hmm.
going back to David Lean, I would think.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but it was Brosnan that I chummed around with and rode in the back of a Cadillac with him. We just chatted and chatted and chatted for a long time until he was
Nice.
called to set. And then between takes we'd talk and then he invited me to Hastings where they were in England where they were going to shoot next, and I sort of looked at my bank account and thought, no way. Very, very nice to be invited, but there's no chance I was
Yeah.
going to go.
Well, I'm looking forward to checking out the documentary. I've heard of the story of Grey Owl. I haven't had a chance yet to really look into it, but yeah, if anybody else is interested in checking that out and checking out Kevin's documentary, The Spirit of Grey Owl, it's on Tubi. I'd like to zip ahead to some of your and talk about some of your more recent work. Specifically, well, your short film, Sarah McDougal Meets the Ghost of Beethoven, and your documentary, Healy Willen, Doctor of Notes. Of course, we know, you have a massive background in massive professional background in music, and obviously both of these things revolve around music. Can you fill us in kind of on the inspiration for the film and the documentary, and what sort of recognition has come from those?
Well, I've always been interested in making movies for children or for young people. In fact, I've got several series on the side, which I'd love to produce if I could find the right people to work with. But
Oh,
anyway, the
okay.
Sarah McDougal one, my background is piano, and my mom was a piano teacher, and this was just an obvious thing for me to do. I can't remember where it comes from because I was in my 20s when I wrote this thing, in my
Oh,
early 20s.
okay.
But I remember pitching it to the CBC in Toronto, and they told me it would make a better radio play, and I don't know, I just kind of blew that off. I thought, nah, it's a better movie. So I approached TV Ontario and got into a good working relationship with a woman there who ran the children's section. And eventually she got me a $40,000 license fee to make it.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, again, I mean, this isn't, this is just me alone with no producers. And I don't consider myself a producer, but she believed in the project. And I was, quite buoyed by that, I suppose. And so I ran off and I managed to get Jared Parks, to play Beethoven. He was, for those of you who remember Fraggle Rock, he was Doc. He was the only human.
Oh, he was
He was
the
Doc.
guy with the glasses and the
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
dog
yeah,
and oh, okay.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
A great guy. I used to actually drink with that guy in Toronto at
Nice.
pubs. And that's what, I asked him, I said, would you want to play Beethoven? You kind of look like Beethoven. He said, oh, I'd love to. And then I got Robin Phillips, who at the time was the director of the Stratford Festival, to play the music teacher. He loved the script. So everybody I asked, they said yes. And then the project kind of exploded and wasn't made because Telefilm Canada that year had deferred their funds for a year because of mismanagement. I think it was the
Oh.
only year in their history where that happened.
Oh,
And
shoot.
so my license fee expired,
Oh, no.
and and then I think that was when she actually retired. Ruth Vernon was her name, TVO. She retired, so I abandoned the project. So fast forward about 35 years, and that's when, as you mentioned at the beginning, when I bought all this new digital equipment.
Mhm.
I was new to it, and I thought this is now my chance because we can make this fairly cheaply. I had the perfect Beethoven in Leap Year Cherie and an excellent actress, um, Madigan, who she could already play the piano, so it was a no-brainer, and she looked the part to me. So I was able to shoot at Elmwood and Ashbury both, and in my living room where the upright piano is, and
Fantastic.
so I blackened my windows for an entire year to the living room so that I could
No
just use
way.
it as a studio.
That's
So people
dedication.
people walking by outside probably thought I was running a meth lab.
Yeah, really.
There's all
You're
this
just a
black, and then
dedicated
there's
filmmaker.
this bright light emanating through the door. And well, the shooting was sporadic because, of course, I was shooting with a lot of kids and they were all in school. So it was the
Mhm.
availability of these kids. So my crew was made up of essentially three people. There was me. I did most of the camera work and the lighting. And then there was Peter Polgar, who did some camera work, and Shad Young, uh, who did the audio and some lighting. And that
Mhm.
was it. So I think it was a budget of $400, and
Real.
it was a 42-minute film.
Oh, wow. 400 bucks.
So yep, that was my first foray into digital filmmaking.
Oh, wow. The actors just volunteered their services?
Yeah, yes, they were
Really?
all
Oh.
volunteer actors, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, they loved the script and they just wanted to
Okay.
do it, and all the parents were really supportive, and the
Mhm.
teachers at the schools were supportive.
That screened at the Mayfair?
Yes, that
Yes.
it screened at the Mayfair, and it also screened at the Festival Music and Beyond. It screened there four times, and that's
Mhm.
classical music festival takes place the first 2 weeks of July here in Ottawa.
Right.
It also played, or it's also playing, I should say, on Just Watch Me, that same platform I was
Okay.
talking about earlier. Yeah.
Okay. So if anyone wants to
There are a
check it out.
few of my films on that streaming
Yeah.
platform.
Wow. That must feel good to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you were to, what's the synopsis of Sarah McDougal?
The synopsis. Okay, well, she's just this this young girl who is would rather not practice the piano but go and play sports with her friend. And her mother, makes her stay home. She's not an overbearing mother. She's a loving mother.
Mhm.
But it's Beethoven that shows up because he can't stand her playing.
Oh,
One of
okay. Oh,
one of
that's
his famous
cool.
one of his famous pieces. So he appears out of nowhere and yells at her, and and then he realizes what he's done and immediately disappears. And she's by herself in this room,
Was that
dark room with a
Beethoven?
piano. And he does eventually appear, and then of course he teaches her properly, and she enters a
Okay.
piano competition, and then she gets to play with her friends.
And given your background in music, I mean, it was inevitable that you would do
Yeah,
the
and
classical
there's,
music.
as I've said about it before, I think it entertains, but it educates as
Hmm.
well without you realizing that you're learning something.
And that's perfect.
It's more fun than anything.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's what you want, especially if it's
Yeah.
especially if it's targeted at kids. But your documentary, Healy Willen, Doctor of Notes, that one's a little more serious. Can you fill us in a little bit on that? What's that about?
Well, it's a straight bio about a British church musician and composer who came to Canada around 1913 and became quite famous here with hundreds and hundreds of, I think 800 compositions, something like that.
Oh wow.
And and one of his operas was produced by Canadian Opera Company and was picked up by the CBC. And we're talking about the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
He died in 68. So, but I was approached by a friend, a musical colleague here in town, Matthew Larkin, who had been approached in Toronto by this wealthy elderly woman who was she was running a collection of orphanages of all things,
Oh wow.
and she had sung with Willen in the 50s and 60s and wanted some kind of record of his life. So Matthew said, "Oh, I know just the fellow," because I grew up as a church musician and as a composer. So yeah, we put our heads together, and so this woman paid us to make this film, and I filmed 6 people, few of whom knew Dr. Willen. One was his daughter, who just died last month at the age of 104.
Oh wow.
So I interviewed her when she was a spring chicken of about 99 or 100. And
Wow.
she's very prominent, of course, in the documentary. And I've known her for many, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's how that got started.
For people who don't know, who was Healy Willen in your mind?
Right. Okay. So he was, I don't know, the quintessential educator, um, musician slash composer, and people today still are performing his works. I mean, my choir, 17 Voices, has recorded his works. Uh, I think there are a lot of young people sort of discovering the beauty of his work and resurrecting it. And so his scores and his letters, his correspondence, has all been donated here to Ottawa, to the National Archives. And there was actually an NFB film made about him in 1959.
Really?
Yeah, in black and white. It's quite stagey and theatrical, but it's very entertaining and quite well done, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. He was just a regular fellow who happened to be a bit of a genius and raised his 4 children and had a life of music in Toronto, who people knew around the world.
Was he an
So,
inspiration for you as a musician?
um, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very traditional composer,
Okay.
not quite in the vein of Benjamin Britten, who's a modern 20th century English composer. I derive far more inspiration from someone like that.
Okay.
It's more quirky and less conventional,
Okay.
and very innovative. I wouldn't say that Healy Willen was innovative. I'd say that he borrowed from traditional composers and made it his own.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I can say about his composition. Archivally, I thought it was very important.
Right.
And all 6 people that I interviewed, I know them quite well.
Mm.
And so it was good to interview and capture all their reminiscences. It's important, I think, these documentaries and capturing oral history.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not enough of that, I think, especially in Canadian history. I think we've swept a lot of it under the carpet. I think the CBC, in fact, has fallen down on the job, if I can say so here, over the decades of not properly capturing our oral history.
Yeah, I would agree in the sense that there is a interview that are you familiar with Jay Buckarell? I've mentioned this on another podcast. You know that you're familiar with the actor Jay Buckarell?
Yes, the comedian.
Boucherel? Yeah, he's Canadian. He's very Canadian. He's very staunchly Canadian. He's a very proud Canadian. Huge Habs fan. I think he was born in Ottawa and grew up in Montreal. There was an interview that he did. I believe it was with George Stephanopoulos, where well, if you know a bit about him, he's obviously he's been in American stuff, and he's produced a couple of movies here. He did Goon and Goon 2 with Sean William Scott. Is that the guy who played Stifler in American Pie? Anyway, he was in that hockey movie Goon. He loves to produce things here, and he said something during the interview that really stuck with me. It's that it seems like Canada, whenever we produce anything, it's almost like we're ashamed or afraid to say that it's from here. Like, he alluded to this film that David Foley from Kids in the Hall had done.
Right.
And, you could tell it was very Canadian. I mean, the average American wouldn't know, but it was just so Canadian and about a very Canadian story. But then, they took the Ontario license plates and they changed them to like New Hampshire or something. And it's like, why?
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
Like, why are we hiding the fact that it's the Canadian? Like, there's a documentary out there called Vancouver Never Plays Itself. They always use Vancouver for something else, for some American town or some fictional American town, but it's never Vancouver. It never stands in for Vancouver. And that always kind of stuck with me because even though he's done American work, he's a very, very proud Canadian. He's he fights for the Canadian identity, and and firmly believes, and I wholeheartedly agree with him, that we have a much more unique identity than a lot of the world may realize. And I think part of the reason why they don't realize is because we hide it for some reason. The reason Jay Buckarell is so passionate about making movies in Canada is, not because he is one, but not just because he is one, but because, he's happy to do stuff for the U.S. market, but that's already adding to a very massive tapestry. Whereas he would rather add to the Canadian tapestry, which needs that CanCon, which needs that voice out in the world to say, hey, we're about something. We're not just Americans who are unarmed.
Right.
We have a rich culture, and the world needs to see that. And so I agree that there's not enough done to make the Canadian voice heard on the global stage. So both these films, Sarah McDougall and Healy Willen, they've gotten a fair amount of recognition from various festivals and such.
Sarah McDougall has won a couple of awards, and honestly, I can't remember which countries. I think Sweden might have been one. Right. Healy Willen, I think it might play this summer at Music and Beyond, so a few screenings. In fact, yeah, I sent it to a London festival, London, England, and it won first prize for feature documentary there.
Fantastic.
And I think that was about a month after I had finished it, so I was really happy about that. And I wasn't entirely happy with the sound. Some people might be interested in this, but the sound wasn't, you know, it wasn't great. So I found an AI platform through Adobe and fed the sound through it and downloaded it and recut the whole thing. And it sounded so much better
Wow.
that I entered it into more festivals. I was finally proud of it,
Oh,
whereas I was
wow.
kind of hiding it. And so that's, I mean, so, there's a lot of people against AI, but there are some really great applications, and this is definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I just like literally just finished cutting it a few weeks ago and just started sending it out again.
Really? Oh, the special edition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The director's cut.
The
Yeah.
director's cut. So switching gears a little bit, I wanted to. You told me a story about what you were up to during COVID. You were hired to do a film about 6 concerts for Ottawa's professional string ensemble, 13 Strings, and this meant shooting with 6 or 7 cameras and making sure all post-production was done within a week. You got to fill me in on that experience because that must have been like you must have been pulling your hair out with stress.
I don't need to pull my hair out.
That's what happened to your hair, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Um, well, 13 Strings for uh, people should go hear them because they're fantastic. Professional string players. And of course, during COVID, there were no audience members that could come into uh, performance venues. So I was brought in to direct the multiple camera shoot, and we had a separate audio fellow, which meant that once we were done with the concert, it was literally just a filmed concert. He would email me the audio, and I would have to sync up all the cameras, and that's multiple stops and starts as well. So every time
No kidding.
the
My
orchestra
goodness.
stops, I have to stop and resync everything,
Oh my
and then I
God.
have to edit all the different cameras, and I've got to do the color correction and the titling and blah 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 blah.
In a
But it was
week.
a great experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, the Christmas one was really involved, and I think I was half an hour late in getting it to their live stream on
Oh.
YouTube.
Oh shoot.
So people were waiting around a half hour and they're writing in, and it
Oopsie.
was still uploading because I think it would take about 8 hours to upload. Um,
Oh man.
yeah, but it was a great experience,
Mm.
and the hardest part was just getting the lighting right so it didn't shine in any of the musicians' eyes because, of course, they're scattered all over the stage. I learned quite a lot from that experience.
How did you get involved with that? How?
Well, because 17 Voices, we perform once a year with 13 Strings. I know them all.
Mm.
Good friends with the conductor and the executive and so on. So I was kind of an obvious choice. And plus, I am a musician and I can cut the way a musician would cut it.
Right.
And
Of course.
they're happy with that because I know what there's some camera operators say, what's a cello, for instance? What's a double? So I said, it's that big instrument over there. And
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, so I would look at the score and know where the instruments are coming in, so I knew which way the cameras had to be pointed
Mm.
and what should be close up or medium shot or long shot. And so I had, it was the stage was completely encircled by our cameras.
Is this something you can see somewhere? Is it?
I haven't checked 13 Strings website, but
Okay.
that's where they would likely be.
Yeah.
Um, and I've got a handful of them on my own YouTube channel, but again, I think they're
Right.
probably unlisted.
Okay.
Yeah.
So switching gears once again, those who know you know that you make excellent use of green screen in a lot of your films. How I'm curious to know, like how long have you worked with green screen, and what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that other filmmakers should watch out for when working with it?
I actually haven't been working with it that long. I think it was during COVID. I just tried it once or twice. Um, and I was blown away by what you could do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I never got to the point. I still haven't got to the point where I use green screen with a moving camera, just a stationary one. So I've just primarily been
Okay.
designing, stationary shots, and I'm quite happy with that.
Mhm.
Otherwise you get into motion tracking with After Effects and so on, and eventually I know I'm going to have to do that, but I'm not there yet. Um, but I there's actually a bit of green screen at the beginning of the Healy Willan documentary,
Oh,
where
really?
I played a soprano into ancient Ireland. It's sort of a theatrical, stage like set.
Hmm.
And I just thought that would be really interesting to try. And once my friends saw it, they said, "Wow, this just opens an entire new uh, door." In fact, the beginning of the Willan documentary, there's some green screen because I have the soprano, when she's not singing on camera, I have her roaming through ancient Ireland. So I actually created these sets in Photoshop and then shot her against green screen and placed her into these very theatrical looking sets, and just dissolved back and forth between her singing and her roaming with um, some old costume and so on. And
Cool.
it was an eye opener. Uh,
Yeah.
I then I realized, my God, I can do whatever I want with this. Maybe not to the point of Marvel and so on, but if you design it properly and light it properly, you can really create some interesting storytelling with it.
Hmm.
And so I really experimented, of course, with a film called The Painter, where I have Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel on a Renaissance scaffolding, and I built the scaffolding from materials from Dollarama. Um, so the scaffolding and the what he's standing on, the platform he's standing on, I think that's a total of $40. I just painted it and
From the dollar store.
I hand tied it with little ropes, also from the dollar store.
I remember you bringing the
And
model to Kino.
yes, that's right. I
Hmm.
did bring that thing. But I shot it, at different angles, different focal lengths, depending on how I'd designed the shot, whether I was looking up at Michelangelo or Michelangelo's looking down at the floor where the priest is standing.
Hmm.
And, it was a complete education. And, um, in fact, it's 2 years later, and I don't think I would really do it any differently.
Hmm.
I'm so pleased with it. You can tell that we're not really in the Sistine Chapel, but I think it was realistic enough.
Hmm.
The fact that I shot it in my living room, and made it look quite vast, looked like it
Hmm.
was, you know,
It made quite a
fairly,
big impression at Kino, and I know that you've submitted to a number of festivals, like European festivals and such, and,
yeah,
and it's got quite the accolades.
yeah, especially in Italy of all places.
Yeah,
It's won a couple in Rome and a couple in Milan,
that's
a couple of
awesome.
first prizes, best short comedy. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, so I'm quite pleased with that one for sure.
Was it the campers or the hunters? I believe it was the campers, where you mentioned to me once. Or you mentioned at Kino that you couldn't get actors back because it was the winter and there was snow on the ground or whatever. So you had to superimpose an actor looking out at the
Right. Oh yeah.
vista
Okay.
or whatever. I
Yeah.
rewatched that. Was it the camper? It was the campers, right?
It was the campers.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
rewatched that and I honestly cannot tell it's green screen. You told people
Yeah.
it was green screen because they couldn't redo it at the time. But I rewatched it, I'm like, that's green screen? Like it looks like he's really there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Fantastic job.
Well, thanks. Yeah. All it was that the actor has four little tiny children, and he just couldn't climb up the top mountain with us that day. So I said,
Right.
"All right, I'll just shoot the other actor," and then it was a couple of months later, when I went back to North Bay, and it was the beginning of winter, I think there was snow on the ground.
Right.
And I just hung a green screen on the door of my cottage and, looked at the frame that we had shot already.
Mm-hmm.
And then got the camera angle right and the lighting right. Fortunately, it was the same kind of gray day, so I didn't really have to do, it was all natural light. I didn't have to do very much. And
Okay.
yeah, so he just walked into frame against the green screen, and then I put him in walking with the other fellow into the shot on top of the mountain overlooking the lake,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really quite seamless.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
the both actors were really surprised by
Yeah.
it, in fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, if there's a lesson for people. If you're missing an actor, don't worry about it. Just shoot him a couple of months later.
Hellman's Lair superimposed him in using green screen. Yeah,
That's
no,
right.
honestly, if you hadn't have said anything at Kino, I would have never known. It looked
Well,
like
that's
he's
good.
really there. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're a wizard with the green screen. I've seen a great deal of your shorts, your more recent work, the packages, the hunters, the painter, the chair, which I worked on you with.
Drone.
Which of yeah, with the drone work, yep. Which of these would you say you're most proud of, and why? And what was your inspiration for your what was your inspiration for it?
Oh, I don't know if I can pick one because
Or a few,
I'm proud of each one of them for different reasons. And
right?
if I could just speak generally about these short comedies, I
Mm-hmm.
think what I'm proud of overall is that I feel like I've immersed the audience into the world I'm trying to create. And
Mm-hmm.
if you look at again the painter, you kind of feel, with the camera design that you're part of the action. You're sort of there in the Sistine Chapel with them, and
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah.
kind of feels like the Renaissance, because I've got it a sort of this golden cast
Mm-hmm.
and a sort of antiquated cast of light. Whereas if you look at the hunters, we shot in a very remote part of North Bay where people really don't go. It's adjacent actually to my property. It's climbing up a bit of a mountain, and on top of this mountain, there's this lake. It's a lake on top of a lake, which is very, very unusual, and it's pristine because it's untouched. I think we managed to capture the sort of coldness, the the blues and the greens, and of course the white of the snow.
Absolutely.
So it's really a lot of it comes down to color grading, I suppose, and making
Mm-hmm.
it look how you want it to look. You're sort of you're creating this world in which these actors are playing, almost like it's you're building a set on in a theater.
Yeah.
This is how you want a musical to look. This is how you want Waiting for Godot to look, kind of gloomy and sparse and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I try and choose these locations to really, really match the subject matter
Mm-hmm.
and create that world, and doing so with light and with color.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of each one of them. I mean, there's the packages, which I decided to do in black and white, and tried to get the lighting of that harken back to the German expressionists, and
Okay.
sort of a homage to Alfred Hitchcock, my favorite director.
Okay.
Um, and I think we managed that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and it really matches the sort of dark humor of the story, that kind of
Yeah.
uh, skewed angles and dramatic noir lighting and that sort of thing.
I've seen your choices in action on set while producing something like with the chair, and the
Right.
choices of lighting and color and so on and so forth. And I'm glad to see that a lot of these things are getting quite the accolades. I would be amiss to not mention your bit part in Adventures in Babysitting.
Yeah. very bit part.
Very
Yeah.
bit part. Tell people a little bit about that. When you told me about it previously, I was very entertained by this fact.
Well, yeah. Again, of course, I was living in Toronto, and I was with an agency called Faces and Places. I think they even still exist.
Mhm.
So I got, in fact, a lot of work in doing commercials, doing television shows, doing American, Canadian films. And occasionally, something would come up which say, okay, fine, that sounds good. And you have no idea if it's going to be a hit or not. And of course, this was Chris Columbus's directorial debut. He had
Mhm.
just written Gremlins for Spielberg. But Disney entrusted him with this large budget family comedy,
Mhm.
Adventures in Babysitting. So I went on as a what they call a special skilled extra. I've been an actor member for most of my life, so this agency sent me to really good projects,
Mhm.
and I was on the set for 4 days. In the chop shop, I was a mechanic, and I remember, we're wardrobe one location, and then we all had to jump into vans to go to the set. And I hopped in to the back of the van with Elizabeth Shue, and I had no
Nice.
idea who she was, and vice versa, of course.
Yeah.
But we chatted. We had a nice chat on the way to the set, and
Yeah.
found her to be, extremely nice and
Mhm.
from a good family. I think her dad was in medicine or something,
I don't
and
think she'd done
obviously,
a lot up to that point. I think her big role up to that point was probably Karate Kid.
yeah. And I had seen the Karate Kid, but I didn't link her to that.
Didn't
I'd
put them
just
together.
forgotten,
Yeah.
I suppose, and I guess I didn't really know her name.
Well, being a big as you can tell, I'm a big Back to the Future fan. So knowing that you've met Elizabeth Shue, I'm rather jealous because she played the girlfriend in the two sequels.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she went on to have obviously a big career.
Absolutely, yes.
She starred with Tom Cruise and
Hmm.
and so on, and
Yeah.
she's still
Leaving
making
Las
movies,
Vegas with
leaving
Nick
Las Vegas.
Cage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Um,
powerful role there.
so anyway, but the fun bit was just watching them make the movie. They had several cameras, I guess, they thought, oh, we've got a first time director. Let's cover his butt. And but he knew exactly what he was doing. I think it was
Yeah.
apparent. He was
Clearly.
only in his 20s, and obviously before Home Alone and Harry Potter and so on.
Hmm.
Um, but it was it was a great experience to watch a major American production.
Hmm.
And I didn't just be an extra. I wandered around and talked with um, people that were working on the sets. They were, you know, next door. They were painting the interior of the where that party was in
Hmm.
Chicago.
Oh wow.
Um, with green screen or blue screen. I forget. I think it was blue screen at the time. I was in my element. I thought this is terrific watching these pros at work.
Would
And
you
so I was
say
with.
it inspired you to make films of your own and to get involved in film studies?
I can't say it inspired me to do that
Yeah.
because the budget was so massive, and
Right.
all I could think of was how am I ever going to get to this point? As a Canadian, how am I going to get to this point?
But you've been involved in film at that point, like as an actor, so clearly you had some interest in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, my interest was much earlier. I was 10 years old.
Right, yeah, with the Super
Yeah,
8. Yeah,
yeah,
making
and
films your own.
I remember having a wind-up Kodak Brownie, my parents' camera, and flying in a helicopter over Niagara Falls and filming the falls with
Oh,
this
wow.
wind-up camera, and just kept filming until it died down. Wasn't even a battery in it; it was just a wind-up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm totally with you as to having a fascination with filmmaking from a young age. Mine started a little later. I mean, it was the late '80s. My dad came home with a giant, just completely out of the blue. I don't know why he did it. He was a frugal man, so it was a bit of a shock to us all. But he brought home one of the big, full-sized VHS camcorders that weighed a ton,
Yeah.
And at that point, when I could see what you could do with it, it was like, I swear to God, it never left my shoulder. I was hooked, and that was the seed that started it all. So we all have a genesis. We all have something that sparked that fire in us. So yeah, Kevin. So are there any other little tidbits, interesting filmmaking tidbits that you'd like to add?
Well, I also recall Faces and Places sent me off to work on a film by director Peter Yates, who also did Bullet and The Dresser, which are two really fantastic movies. Of course, he's since died now. Um, and it happened to star Cher. It's called Suspect, and it was her first really big role where she was prominent, I think, and she was quite nervous, and in it was a very, very young Irish actor by the name of Liam Neeson, who was just
Never
starting
heard of
out.
him.
And Peter Yates, the director, he motioned me over, and he said, "I want you to be the stand-in for this guy." And I said, "Okay." So the cinematographer put me on an Apple box because I'm only 5'11" or less, and Liam Neeson's about 6'4" or 5.
Wow.
And I didn't know who Liam Neeson was, and again, vice versa. So, but he just hung out in his dressing room, and I was being lit by the cinematographer, who happened to be Billy Williams, who shot Richard Attenborough's Gandhi and got the Oscar for
Oh,
it.
wow.
And then he shot the opening sequence to The Exorcist, which I think is in the film, it's one of my favorite parts because you can feel that English documentary feel to it. It's
Wow.
it's almost perfectly shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was more entranced by the fact that I was working with Peter Yates and with Billy Williams than I was with Cher and Liam Neeson.
That's awesome.
But anyway, I thought, I saw the movie, in fact, recently, just this past summer, and I thought, it kind of still holds up. It's not bad. It's a pretty good picture.
That was shot in Toronto?
And shot in Toronto.
Yeah.
In a really fantastic courtroom set. It looked completely real, but it was all plastic. Like the wood was made out of a kind of plastic. And it looks great on film. And then Faces and Places, they wanted me to work on something called Police Academy.
Oh, yeah.
And I had rehearsals, and so I had to turn them down. I was going to be a police officer.
Oh, wow. Well, that would have been cool.
And I couldn't do it because I had rehearsals. So
shoot.
That was that.
So
Faces and Places, they did, and probably still to this day, they're doing some good work.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a lot of feature films with them.
Yeah.
And met some pretty interesting people.
And there was something you wanted to mention about Kino?
Oh, yes, yeah. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Vince Valentino and Kino. I never really thought that rhymed until I just said it. Because
it does, doesn't it? Wow. I didn't realize that either.
I think Vince does absolutely tireless work for the film community. And there's no way I would have, I would have met up with so many interesting and talented people had I not come to Kino. And I was, I suppose, introduced to Kino by Adrian Fainwax, who, because I worked on a couple of his films, and he said, "Oh, you should come to this," So I did, and I thought, this is great. This is just like the Ottawa movie makers that I used to belong to in the late 70s. Okay, I'm starting really to date myself, but anyway, I couldn't believe the number of people. I think the Kino website, the Facebook site, has about 11,000, 12,000 members, something like that.
Yeah.
So I had absolutely no idea that any of this stuff was happening until quite recently.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just wanted to say hats off to the whole organization and to everybody who takes part.
Have you watched Vincent's podcast?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, I have. I don't think I watched the whole thing, but
yeah.
yes, I have.
He kind of gives a
Yeah.
bit of a history of how he got involved
Right.
and all
Right.
that,
Right.
and
Right.
it's quite interesting. And yeah, I'm right there with you. Like I love what he does for the community, for the film community, and gives us a stage and a voice
Yeah.
for for creative people to express themselves. And yeah, amazing guy, amazing guy. I think he's mentioned in almost every podcast that I do.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very very prolific name in the a big name in the Ottawa film community for sure. So yeah, so we'll wrap up. Thanks so much, Kevin, for telling your story. Um, you've done some amazing work, worked with some amazing people, had some amazing experiences, and got some amazing accolades. Clearly, you're very passionate about filmmaking and what you do, and I look forward to seeing what else you create and put out there. Thanks so much for being on the show and sharing your story.
Well, thank you. It was fun to sort of recollect. There are a lot of things I actually had forgotten about until I sat myself down here and started talking with you. So thanks for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I'm sure our viewers will have plenty of great takeaways. And I highly recommend people check out Kevin's stuff. Look him up on YouTube. This is Dan and Kevin saying, see you in the future.